Hello again. I'm Sarah. This is Hardcover Hearts, and I'm back after a little vacation. My husband and I went to Europe, and I got a chance to have a vacation where I was able to see Leo's little book life, Celia, Elizabeth, and Eric Carl Anderson, which was all absolutely delightful. Do some book shopping, do some reading, and then I had a work trip and then Oxford. So I spent the last week in Oxford. But I'm back now because I'm really, really, really bad at trying to do this when I'm traveling. So I just decided I'm not going to stress out and try to do that. I'm instead just going to enjoy my vacations, read the books, and then wrap it up for you when I get back, which is what I'm trying to do today. So let me talk about some of the books that I read recently that I think are most worthy of conversation. So as I was planning to take this trip, usually I bring a lot of books if I'm going on a trip. That's just as important as my wardrobe. But in this case, I knew I'd be buying a lot of books while I was there. A lot of them are behind me. I'm going to do a haul video after this, so stay tuned for that. But because of that, I didn't want to load myself down with books that I would need to bring back. So the only books I took were the 2 Shakespeare books that I had to read for class, and then also my Kindle. And I loaded my Kindle with all of my NetGalley ARCs and really used this as an opportunity to get through some of those because I've been woefully bad about keeping up with my NetGalley. So the first one is a book that just came out, and this is The Vaster Wilds by Lauren Groff. I remember going to Lauren Groff's publishing party when she had it here in the Bay Area for Fates and Furies and found her to be interesting. I thought Fates and Furies was a very interesting take on a marriage and the ways that people think about themselves in their marriage versus what actually happens. And as you know, that won a ton of awards. It was on President Obama's read list. There was a lot of conversation about that book when it came out. I think she's been doing really interesting work. And while I didn't personally really get on with Matrix, I think I might need to revisit that because it has all the elements that I should like as a historical novel, convent, a woman rising through the ranks. There was something that I just didn't understand about it or didn't connect with. And I think what it is became more relevant in this book and more obvious to me. And that is that she's really going deep into the characters, and plot is becoming less important and less valid. And you'll know what I mean when I tell you the plot of this. It's very, very simple. We have an unnamed girl who was an indentured servant in colonial America who escapes. So the plague has plague or cholera, some horrible disease has broken out in this colony, and she escapes from this horrible fate and is on the run. So we meet her as a teenager, but a very, very experienced, very smart, very thoughtful young woman as she is basically running and surviving in the wilderness. That's it. We meet very few characters. There are very little dialogue. She spends her time kind of explaining how she arrived where she is through flashbacks of the family that she was indentured to, the family that kind of adopted her from a foundling, took her in, and then the woman that took her in married after her first husband died, fell in love with this young, shiny new minister and got wooed by his gorgeous physique as well as his oratory skills. and really made a bad choice in this man, because on a whim, on a lark in the middle of the congregation, he announced that he is going to set forth and move his family to the new world. And he has all of these new ideas about what's going to await them in the new world, and ideas of grandeur and lofty money and fame and riches and all of this. Now, we know the situation of what happened in the New World, and the wife is horrified, doesn't want to do it, but also is jealous enough not to want him to go on his own and be tempted with another woman, and doesn't trust that he wouldn't do something inappropriate and then leave her behind. So although she is wealthy, although she really does have the power in the relationship, she agrees to come over. And it is absolute misery from the moment they get on the ship to the moment when they land, and the colonists are expecting that, oh, here's a ship that's going to save us, that's going to bring reinforcements, that's going to bring more goods, and instead realizes, no, they're no better off. And in fact, they're going to have to help feed these new people. So it's a calamity all around. And we follow this young girl, and as she's kind of pulled along with all of these situations. And it's only when she flees that she comes into herself. It's remarkable. The nature writing is remarkable. The heartbreak, as well as the heart lifting and inspiring to see this young woman survivalist out on her own and truly living an isolated life was phenomenal. This book is really, really interesting, and I hope that it is nominated for the Booker. There's a couple that I'm hoping appear on the Booker list next week. So next up, I read a book called Rosewater by Liv Little. Now, this is contemporary novel set in London, and we follow Elsie. And Elsie is having a real hard time. Elsie's kind of a player, and she has all these women that she's juggling, but she cannot get her life together. She is struggling with money, and she's really been on the back foot ever since she was kicked out of her home for not just her sexuality, but for not really wanting to be the caretaker to her young twin brothers. She comes from a Ghanaian family, very religious, very strict, but she was raised in the UK, and so she doesn't have those same values and those same things, and especially because she always felt overlooked, especially when the twins were born. So she left home and has been on her own ever since, and really struggles to get a foothold and know what she wants to do. The only thing that she really cares about is her writing and her poetry. It opens with a scene where she is getting evicted, and she is frightened and embarrassed and just feels kind of lost, and her best friend takes her in. What makes this interesting is her best friend had recently told her she was in love with her. And so we see this tension all of a sudden in Elsie, who does love her best friend, but isn't sure she's in love with her, but desperately needs this place to stay. So immediately we have these awkward dynamics between the two of them. I thought this was really good. It was a thoughtful story. The dialogue was good. The characters were really rich. I really loved the sense of community, specifically the lesbian and artistic community that really came through and shone through in this book. I thought it was a really strong book, and very happy to have read it. Next book, this one made me laugh, uproariously laugh, made me giggle. made me cringe, made me look away in horror, and then made me laugh again. So this was a full gamut of emotions in The Rachel Incident by Carolyn O'Donoghue. Now, I did this one in audio. So this is set in Cork, Ireland, and it is during the time when there is an economic downturn. And we have this wonderful character, Rachel. She's a college student, but she's kind of not, she doesn't really stand out in any particular way until she meets and forms this lifelong, lasting, very deep bond with this man named James. And they meet at the bookstore that they both work at the Christmas, that they've both been hired for the Christmas rush. And James is effervescent and witty and hilarious and, one of those dynamic personalities that draws everyone in. And it's very obvious to Rachel that he's gay, but he won't admit that he's gay. He's in the closet. He's not acknowledging it. I should mention this feels like it's in the 1990s, maybe early mid 90s. They form this bond, they move in together, and all of a sudden they're always doing things together. Rachel has these romantic relationships that always are kind of compared to James. In fact, she meets this one man that is really interesting, and they have this insane sexual chemistry. And she tells him, when he tells her his name is James, she goes, well, I've already got one of those, so you'll have to be. And she calls him by his last name. Really funny. She has this crush on her literary professor. And when she finds out that he has a book coming out, she and James hatch a plot to do a book signing there and have a launch event at the bookstore. And they concoct a reason to do this. They pretend that there's all this buzz about this very boring book, very academic book, very boring. And in doing that, they meet the wife and start to become more included in his life. On top of that, you have the challenge that, as I mentioned, that Cork is very economically depressed right now, going through a recession. And Rachel really wants to break into publishing and agree and kind of weasels her way into an internship with the professor's wife. So as you can see, there's a lot of moral ambiguity, a lot of scarcity thinking going on in this book, and a lot of complex situations come out of it. I thought this was great. I thought it was really fun. The characters were complex. The dialogue was snappy and witty and so funny, but also a little heartbreaking. And there's just a lot. There's a lot here. It's a very thorough, fun read, and I highly enjoyed it. Now, a book that I really hope is going to be on the Booker list. I really hope this is, because this one broke my heart and gave me a lot to think about while I was in Europe, specifically in Oxford. This is In Memoriam by Alice Winn. So yes, I'm holding the book here, but I listened to the audiobook because it came up in my library. I found this book in a used bookstore and used my credits that I had at the bookstore to get it because I knew I wanted to read it. So while I was in Europe, the audiobook came up from my library. I had put a hold on it. So I couldn't wait. So I decided to do the audio, which was very, very good, by the way. This book is set in England at a boarding school, and we meet a bevy of young men who are experimenting with their masculinity, with what it means to be a man, also with crushes they have on each other. Is it homosexuality? Is it just play? Is it just a means of experimenting and developing their sexuality, knowing eventually that this is just a phase and they're going to grow out of it and eventually marry when they're out of boarding school? And while we're there, we meet Henry Gaunt and Sidney Elworth. Gaunt and Elworth are young men, and Gaunt is deeply, devastatingly in love with Elworth. Elworth is this dynamic personality, very strong, very almost domineering, and projects this power. A very different dynamic character than the James of the last book I mentioned in the Rachel incident. In this case, he's more of a powerful figure. People feel strong in his presence. Henry is half German, and this becomes a very big problem as war is starting to break out. And we're talking about, we're in the 1914, so World War I. His family, his mother specifically, is very embarrassed to be and feels very vulnerable in the fact that half of her family is German. And so she really encourages Henry to go out for the war. Henry is not built for this. Henry is a poet. He's known for always having a quote, always having a poem at the tip of his tongue to be able to reflect on any situation. He's kind. He's nerdish. He's delicate. He is not somebody who is fit for war. He is shamed into going and enlisting. Elworth is shocked and horrified and decides that he's going to sign up too, in part to be there and to protect Gaunt. This immediately brought back to mind a gorgeous, gorgeous book called Alec. And this is by William di Canzio, and I'll put a link to it below. And it was kind of like continuing the story of Maurice by E.M. Forster. So we have a lot of similarities in all of these novels. So this has shades of Maurice in the school and the tension between, is this a real romance? Does he really love me? Or is this just a phase? Am I just being used during this time? And then war coming in and really solidifying a lot of things. This is devastating. The way she portrays war in this book was thoughtful, visceral, terrifying. And one of the things I loved most is the way she leverages the news articles and the ways that the survivor families found out about the letters they received about their young men who died, which is in essence the in memoriam, and how they're not always accurate, but they're meant to give some kind of solace to the family. This was remarkable. As I mentioned, I sobbed, I cried. It's so beautiful, and there's so much fragility at the same time that there's so much power and masculinity and really toxic masculinity identified and kind of brought up to the forefront. I really hope this one also appears on the Booker list. So fingers crossed. Then this one, when I read the first installment of this, at the end, I said, man, I really want more of this character, and only to find out that was in the works. And this is what came out of that. This is Crook Manifesto by Colson Whitehead. This is the Ray Carney #2. And this tells us, this kind of really sets this whole dynamic, visceral world of 1970s Harlem and New York City, with Ray Carney at the center. Ray Carney is our main character, and he is a Black man with a family, and he has gone the straight and narrow. His father was a criminal, and he really got involved in a bunch of things that he shouldn't have, but he has been good after the end of last book. But the Jackson 5 are coming to town. and his daughter wants tickets to the Madison Square Garden concert and will not talk about anything else. So we are immediately pulled into the sounds and the smells and the sights and the ambiance of 1970s in New York immediately. He wants to get these tickets. They are impossible. His daughter has tried everything. She's entered contests. She's done raffles, anything she can think of, and she cannot get these tickets. And so he reaches out to a dirty cop that he knows to get the tickets and gets pulled in beyond where he ever thought he would go. This is also the time where the Serpico, if you've ever watched the movie with Al Pacino, is happening, where Al Pacino is a cop, a righteous, good cop, who is horrified at the types of things that the cops on his beat are doing. And he breaks it all out and rats them all out and becomes this big scandal. And so in the wake of that, this cop is in trouble, and he needs Ray to help him get out of some of these things, or to set some scores before he might have to go on the run. So there's so many other things that happen. This book is rich. It is rich in detail. It's rich in dialogue. It's rich in characters. It's propulsive. He does everything you would want. He does well. Plot, pace. The pace is all over the place. You'll go super fast and then it'll slow down. And then you come back up again. It is a master class in writing. And then the dialogue is beyond. The dialogue is phenomenal. You really feel immersed in this world, in this setting, in this place. So yeah, I ended the last one in the same way I'm ending this one, which is I still want more. So I hope he continues to let us into Ray Carney's life and to see what happens as we move forward. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see if he's going to do that. He ended it in a way that I could see it stopping, but we'll see. We will see. So that's what I read. Let me talk to you about what I'm currently reading. I started this while I was in London. This is A Horse at Night on Writing, Amina Cain. And already I'm sucked in, loving. This is it's not essays, but it's this kind of writing, reading journal and musings and thoughts on things that she's read and how it's applying to her life. And I'm already writing notes about different books. Very happy to recognize some of the characters and some of the books that she's mentioning, but really loving the experience in her mind right now. Then I'm also reading an arc. This is the Bookbinder of Jericho by Pip Williams. I loved her last book, The Dictionary of Lost Words. It's set in Oxford, and it's a historical novel with around time of the suffragettes and the building of the Oxford Dictionary. That's what the last one was. And this one we take up and we meet a young woman, Peggy, and her twin sister Maud, and they are bookbinders. And Jericho is kind of like the neighborhood that sits very close to Oxford, where most of the working class live. So you have your town, which is your working class, and then your gown, which are the people who study and go to school, your scholars. And so I'm loving it. I'm sure I'll have more to talk about next week. So stay tuned for that. Also reading another NetGalley. This is Maddalena and the Dark. This is set in Venice, and it's very gothic, very, very gothic. Some elements of supernatural are kind of interwoven, and sapphic undertones as well. So I'll have more to talk about that next week as well. Then I'm starting the next author spotlight series. This is for Helen DeWitt. I'm so sorry if you wanted to join and didn't sign up. We've locked it down. So unfortunately, this one's closed, but stay on the lookout. I'm thinking about what authors I want to do next. But this is Helen DeWitt's The Last Samurai. We'll be reading this throughout the month. Then I'm also starting a buddy read with Kathy of The Grim Reader. And this is The Master and Margarita by Mikhail Bulgakov. And I'm using this outstandingly beautiful cover done by Chris Kahn, who is someone that my husband knows and was tattooed by. So very famous tattoo artist did the cover of this. So I'm excited to read this one with the deckled edges. I love a good deckled edge. So really excited. I just read a few pages and I'm stunned at how modern it is. Wasn't expecting that at all. I was expecting more of a historical read, but really happy to be reading that. And then I'm listening to such a fun book. This is a book that I almost picked up 3 different times in London and said, no, I don't need to own it. I'll just see if I can find it from the library. Found it on Scribd. This is The Other Side of Mrs. Wood, and it's a historical novel, and it's set during the time when seances and occultism was really the rage in London. And there's a little rivalry between these 2 women, one more established and one a young upstart. So far, super fun. Loving the audio. Again, it's on Scribd. And yeah, so that's it for me for now for this. I'll look forward to talking to you next week. Bye-bye.